Welcome to Madden Benz Unfiltered. Tim Benz and Mark Madden with you. Glad that you're with us as we are brought to you by Bella Construction with 27 years of experience, specializing in roofing, siding, windows, and doors. Their large purchasing power means unbeatable prices and top quality. For a free estimate, call 724-515-5163 or visit mybellaRoof.com. Bella Construction, where quality and affordability meet. The Steelers lose in Philadelphia. Final score 27-13. They still haven't won there since 1965. And Mark, based on what we saw yesterday, it might not be until, 22-65 before they win there again.
Yeah, unless Norm Snead comes back to quarterback the Eagles.
Oh, he beat them a couple times. He did.
Oh, wait, right. He was the guy who beat them. Okay, scratch that. Yeah, I thought the game was just a rout with a deceptively close score. I know that goes against the grain of what people are saying and what people want to hear, but the Eagles had the ball for 40 minutes to the Steelers' 20. Outgained them by a margin of over 2-1. I know Najee Harris fumbled, and that's the touchstone by which people are deriving hope from that game. If he doesn't fumble, they go on to tie it and maybe win it, but I don't think they do. And I think him fumbling was a recalibration of what had happened up to that point, a reckoning, if you will. I think that put the game back on its proper course. I think had the Steelers somehow scored on that drive and somehow rallied to win the game, and there would have been no guarantee. The best they could have done on that drive is tie, unless they go for two, which they would not have. But my point is, the Eagles were the superior team. The Eagles out-physicaled the Steelers badly, and that might be the worst sign.
Well, here are the siren songs of complaint from people who are trying to make excuses on behalf of the Steelers as to why this game was really closer and better than what it was. One was the Harris fumble. Okay, my counter to that is Philadelphia fumbled twice, and the Steelers did nothing with it on back-to-back touches. So I give the Steelers no sympathy there. Right. To the injuries. Okay, George Pickens was out. By the time TJ Watt went out of this game, the game was already settled, more or less. And Dante Jackson wasn't having a great game. In fact, I'd argue that Pierre might have done better once he went in instead of Dante Jackson. And then let's not forget that Saquon Barkley didn't play for a huge chunk, presumably because of injury. And if not, then you got gashed by Kenneth Gainwell anyway. And then the last point that people seem to be bringing up, Mark, is that the officials had some rough calls against the Steelers. You know, there were some that could have been better. No doubt about it. I think they blew some calls. Then again, I know this. If Jalen Hurts slides as late as Justin Fields did and Minkah Fitzpatrick gets a 15-yard personal foul for that exact same hit, we're still crying about it this morning.
Yeah, Steeler fans think that every decision should go their way. And as far as that unsportsmanlike, the double unsportsmanlikes to Washington and Austin that put the Steelers at the 19 instead of at the Eagles 4, first off, Washington was a big dolt. He didn't need to block Slay through the end zone to the stands. He was just trying to be a bully. That's dumb. It was ill-advised. If he doesn't do it, then the refs don't have a chance to screw the Steelers on that call. Second off, Tim, they got moved back to the 19. They didn't get moved back to the 50. They didn't get moved back to a different zip code. You're still allowed to score from the 19. It was only second down. So, if you want to isolate on the few things that seem to screw the Steelers, be it bad calls or bad breaks, do that. But over 60 minutes, the Eagles overwhelmed the Steelers.
Yeah, it's easy to isolate on a few plays for the Steelers because they only had a few plays. I mean, think about it. They only had 11 plays in the second half. Philadelphia had the ball for 40 minutes. I mean, that last drive was emasculating. And I know they were kind of joking about it on the broadcast, but it turned out to be, how do you like to say it, Mark, ribbing on the square, when it turned out to be the final possession that the Steelers had when Tomlin decided to punt from Philly's 46, and they made a comment like, well, they might not get the ball back. They didn't, because they couldn't get Philly off the field.
Yeah, they needed to go for it there. That was Tomlin, I would say, living in his fears, but what did he have to lose at that point? They were down by a couple scores. You got to go for it there. But don't worry about it, Tim. Have some Fritos. Everything will be fine.
Oh, I can't wait for Hard Knocks this week to see how they try to polish this one up and how they cast everything going wrong around Mike Tomlin instead of Mike Tomlin being part of what was going wrong in this game and leading up to it.
By the way, Tim, as far as where this goes, because I'm an insufferable guy when it comes to attention to detail, I've done some preparation on the tiebreakers.
Yes.
If the Steelers lose at Baltimore, they will be in a dead heat with all the tiebreakers down to where you have to start determining strength of schedule.
Right. Yes. Isn't it strength of victory? Isn't that the one that comes into play?
Yeah, I don't know, Tim. I'm not that much of a stickler for attention to detail. I didn't figure that stuff out, but it's amazing how close they are. So you need to win this game. And if you don't win this game, then it smacks of 2020 and 2019 and 2018. And it's been a while, but Tomlin once had a run of late season collapses, some disintegrations, and this might start to feel like that.
I know where Tomlin and the Steelers might be coming from in regard to nursing these injuries that they've got now, specifically Watt and Pickens. And you could say to yourself, well, the big thing that matters is finally getting a win in the playoffs again, and you're in the playoffs. Okay? But can you win a road playoff game? And I think the answer to that question is only yes if you find yourself in the number 5 seed and you go to Houston. I would only consider that their best shot at winning a road playoff game. They're not going to go to Buffalo and win, and if they can't go to Baltimore and win and the dam finally breaks and the Ravens finally beat the Steelers, why would you turn around and assume that the Steelers would win a second time through in Baltimore?
Well, see, here's the thing. If they lose to Baltimore next week on Saturday and play Baltimore in the playoffs, at that point, they've just lost to the Ravens, and they've collapsed at season's end to drop from the division lead to a wild card, and their momentum would be irreparably broken. Okay, at that point, it's not about having beaten Baltimore 8 of the last 10. It's about what happened much more recently, and not just against Baltimore. That's the big thing about what's going on potentially. Their momentum could be disintegrating. They started 11-0 in 2020, for example, and everyone knew that was fool's gold. But after a loss, and then another loss, and then a bunch of losses, they weren't the same team anymore. If the Steelers lose to Baltimore and then lose to Kansas City at home against Christmas, they won't be the same team anymore either.
The one thing that really disappointed me, because a lot of this game went the way that I thought. I said 30-20 Eagles, so I wasn't too far off in how the game went, the game flow went, final score was posted, etc. The one thing that was an aspect to the Steelers that's usually been pretty good throughout this season and was really bad yesterday was the tackling. They're usually a much better tackling team than they were yesterday.
Yeah, and that cost them, I don't know, what would you say, 50 yards?
Minimal.
Yeah, I mean, for a team that's supposedly so well coached, they sure F up a lot when it comes to fundamentals, don't they?
And that was exposed against a team that has the skill and talent to emphasize your weaknesses. Again, even without Barkley. And, I don't know what kind of game they were playing, even with the network television broadcast saying Barkley wasn't hurt. Well, if he wasn't hurt, then why wasn't he playing? Obviously there was something going on. And Gainwell ripped him apart anyway. I mean, my gosh, he put Dante Jackson in the spin cycle once, and then he split Patrick Queen and Joey Porter another time. Porter had another tough day, and I know he was griping about the officials allowing A.J. Brown to push off. What, George Pickens never pushes off? I just think that Porter's in a slump, but he's looking for anybody who has a friendly ear that he could bend about why it's going on.
Yeah, I think that's true, too. And the same goes when we bitch. I heard a caller to the post-game show said he watched replay of the game, rewound, watched every play when the Steelers won defense over. And he said that Watt got held 6 times without a call. First off, get a life. If you're rewinding in mid-game to see if TJ Watt get held, you need to get held yourself or start holding yourself at the very least.
I wonder how many times.
In terms of Watt being held, it happens to every defensive guy, especially the good ones all the time. Get over it.
I wonder how many times Jalen Carter got held, and nobody, I bet, in Pittsburgh is going back and looking through film to find that number. Also, there was that play where Cam Hayward drew a holding call, and it was a good holding call. But 3 seconds before he got the holding call, his hand was in the face of the offensive lineman who held him, the backup who came in for Landon Dickerson. So, again, there's another example of a call that we don't complain about. We just assume every call is against the Steelers.
What was that guy's name? Dickerson?
No, Landon Dickerson was the injured guy who went out, and then.
Oh no, Tim! I just. That's very unusual in the NFL. A Dickerson who actually plays.
I can't remember Steele. I can't remember what his name was. The other guy who came in. So I'm blocking on who it was, but I know this, that if we're going to spend all this time focusing on a few plays to try to come up with a 2-touchdown margin over a game where you only had the ball for 20 minutes, that feels like twisting yourself into a pretzel to make yourself feel better about the result and this 3-game stretch. I know part of the mentality that Steelers fans had coming into this 3-game stretch was, well, the Steelers are finally due to win in Philadelphia. The Chiefs are finally due to lose a close game. But no one ever said the Ravens are finally due to beat the Steelers, and they just might be.
Yeah, I think the Steelers might wind up beating the Chiefs, though. I think that game's going to be meaningless to the Chiefs. And Mahomes is banged up now. I don't see him playing in that game. Although, you know what's a slippery slope, Tim?
If he doesn't play against Houston and they lose to Houston and then they have to beat the Steelers?
No, I'm thinking for the Chiefs. If, like,
that's what I mean.
Resting guys down the stretch and they get the bye. Like, the thing that's tough to do if you get the bye is resting guys the week before the bye, because then they ain't played in 3 weeks when the divisional round kicks in.
Yeah, the Colts went down that path a couple times, as I remember.
Right.
You know what, though? I mean, Buffalo winning against Detroit takes some of that analysis out of the way, especially if they lose because Mahomes can't play on Saturday of next week, if it comes to that. I don't know if it's going to come to that or not, but it might. And the way they were talking, they seemed even less optimistic about his chances than the Steelers did about Watt. All we heard about Watt was X-rays negative on the ankle, but if it's still an ankle sprain, even if it's low, like Mike Tomlin said, that could be problematic. And so much of what they do to contain Lamar relies on those outside linebackers winning, containing, and applying pressure without getting out of their rush lanes. He and Highsmith do that well. If they're not involved, I hate their chances in Baltimore. And not surprised right now, Mark, to see them as a 6.5-point underdog.
What did they say, Tim, that Watt twisted his ankle?
Yeah, I didn't even see where that happened.
No, it looks like an Achilles to me because there was no twisting. He just was running and pulled up. That's Achilles-esque, not ankle-esque.
Well, whatever it was, I know they described it as an ankle. Watt said he got an X-ray on the ankle. Yeah, they could be tamping down the concern, but you know what? If he's got an Achilles and that shows up on an MRI, then he's not playing anyway. So
it reminded me of when Kabali went down, Tim.
Well, at least Watt made a few plays before he went down. I mean, he did have an impact in the first half. He's one of the few that did.
Yeah, no, I mean, Watt has had some ebb and flow to his game this year. But you know what's ironic? He might win Defensive Player of the Year this year when he doesn't really deserve it as much as last year, but he's beneficiary of, like, Hutchinson getting hurt and Sexy Dexy being on a bad team. He might win it this year by way of just somebody got to.
Yeah, and Garrett having a similar season to him, which has been more boom or bust.
Right.
Also wanted to get to the NFL at large, Mark, and specifically Buffalo, Detroit, Philadelphia, Kansas City. I haven't seen anything yet to dissuade the opinion we both advanced last week, which is they're a cut above. And with these teams playing each other, I think that was underscored this week. Baltimore maybe got the rest that it needed. I know they were just playing New York. But, you know, Lamar, again, showing why it's just a different planet when he plays against anybody besides Pittsburgh.
Well, I think the teams that are a cut above are Detroit, and maybe not even with the injuries, but I think still. Detroit, Kansas City, Buffalo, Philadelphia, and maybe Baltimore. Maybe Baltimore, but they can't beat the Steelers. Like, but every time I see them play somebody else, then again, they've lost some games they shouldn't, too. Like they lost to the Raiders, for heck's sake.
And I do think, I keep trying to figure out as far as just a beatable opponent goes, because I was having a growing opinion of what the Chargers and Broncos could be versus what it would be like going to get a Houston team on the road, since Houston doesn't seem like they were a year ago. But, LA obviously has its warts as we're exposed by Tampa. I'm not sure which of those two would be easier coming to Pittsburgh if they do win the division. I think they could win against any of those three opponents, but beyond that or aside from that, should they have to go to Baltimore again, forget about it, Mark. I'm not picking them on the road in the playoffs.
I'd pick them at home against Baltimore, which is actually a likely matchup if you look at how this could fall.
Yeah, at home. Yeah,
I'd pick them at home because if they play them at home, then they would have beat Baltimore again at Baltimore.
And then at that point, then it's 9-10. And what are you saying if you're Harbaugh to the team about what to do differently? Because I imagine they've tried everything under the sun.
I think they would definitely beat Denver. Here's their winnable playoff games in descending order. At Denver would be a lock.
At Denver? They won't have to go to Denver.
Excuse me. At home against Denver.
Right.
Would be a lock. Believe it or not, my second most winnable scenario, no. At home against Baltimore would be a lock. Then after that, if they played at Houston, I'd pick them, but it would be a 50-50 game. And let me tell you, LA Chargers at Pittsburgh, depending on the weather, would be pick 'em for me. Now, if the weather was bad, I don't know, though. Harbaugh has that power offense that kind of, I used to think it diminished Herbert, but now it lets him pick his spots. My point is, the Chargers have a better coach and a better quarterback. They just do. They have an advantage at the two key spots in a playoff game, quarterback and coach. So I certainly couldn't count them out if they came to Pittsburgh.
What'd you think of the Penguins now they played against the two Canadian teams over the weekend?
I wish we could play them every day, Tim.
Yeah, that would make things a lot better, even though they lost to Ottawa.
I thought they played the Canadians just stink. I thought they played good at Ottawa, though. They should not have lost the game. Joy let in the early goal. Carlson got torched in overtime. And those two are the preeminent scapegoats for why the season hasn't gone better. Although certainly to place all the blame on them would be foolish. It's just not a very good hockey team.
A couple other things revolving around what happened this past week in baseball. I don't know if we talked, Mark, since
one last thing about the Penguins, Tim, if I could.
Yeah.
One thing I don't get. They had Lizotte and Bunning on a third line, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a third line was finally getting some traction. They were playing good. And now Sully split them up. He moved Bunning to the Malkin line. All you hear from Sully is we're trying to get balance. We're trying to get balance. We're trying to get balance. And he finally got a little bit of it, and he split it up.
I think they're just trying to recapture that blip that they had at the end of last season. And I actually think Bunting is more suited to play a third line style, don't you?
I think almost their whole team is suited to play a third or fourth line style, Tim. And I know why he moved Bunting up. He's trying to get Gino going.
Right.
But by the same token, with Gino scoring once and Sid scoring not at all, the Penguins have won 6 out of 9 and got a loser point in there too.
Baseball-wise, Mark, what do you think of the Soto contract, and what do you think the Pirates are trying to do with this first baseman that they got? It felt like they gave up some of what they had, which wasn't much for a guy who I don't know if he's going to be anything. And we just got done hearing that they're going to move Reynolds to first base. So what's happening?
They're negating their biggest strength, which is starting pitching. They should have gone into the season with a rotation of Skeens, Jones, Keller, Falter. You want to keep Bubba Chandler in the minors to start the year, I'm sure. Ortiz should have filled in as the fifth guy and then given way to Chandler when he came up. That is a playoff caliber rotation. And for some reason, they've chosen to negate it and may do so further by trading Keller to cut payroll, which should be the impetus for no one to ever buy a ticket again.
Eric says, is anyone actually that upset? Philly is one of the handful of elite teams in the NFL. Pittsburgh is not. Most people with even half a functioning brain knew the Steelers had little to zero chance, especially with Pickens out. They haven't won there in 60 years. This isn't exactly a shock. No, it's not. I'm more shocked with some of the spin that's going on as to why it was a closer game than it was.
First off, I'm never upset by what the Steelers do. Liverpool tied Fulham at home Saturday. That upsets me. But yeah, I mean, the Eagles are better, but at some point you got to beat those better teams.
Yeah, well, that's
And
the thing. Like
all
the
I
litmus
hear is,
test of what
I
this
hear with great gravitas people saying the Steelers are a Super Bowl contender. They just are not. If you watched that game yesterday and you still think they're a Super Bowl contender, you're clinically insane. You belong in the straitjackets.
Yeah, exactly. See, like if they got to get to the Super Bowl, the path, like that's why this litmus test exists with these three teams. Mark, I said this when I was filling in for you this week, because in order to get to the Super Bowl, you're going to have to do this. You're just not going to have to do it in 11 days. You're going to have to probably beat Baltimore and then two of the four top teams in the NFL. You're playing Baltimore and two of the top four teams in the NFL. It's the same thing as trying to get through the AFC to the playoffs right now, with, by the way, two of the games on the road, which is even before losing to Philly, something that they were going to have to do.
What I'm more concerned about, Tim, is I'm going to New York a little bit over Christmas, not on Christmas. I'm going to see Hamilton.
Have you seen it before?
No. Is it good? Have you seen it?
I've seen it twice.
Will I like it?
I didn't like it as much as I wanted to. I liked it better the second time when I had a better sense of what was going on. Like, read up on it a little bit. And
I'm trying to up my culture, Tim. I saw my first Broadway play ever last year. It was Spam-A-Lot, the Monty Python thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved that. So I'm going to check out Hamilton. I'm going to see the Penguins at the Islanders, too.
If you can see Come From Away, I'd recommend Come From Away more than Hamilton.
I think I saw that in Times Square in the 70s.
Come From Away?
Yes.
No, it was about 9/11, so I don't think that you did.
I think you're missing the...
No, I'm not.
Okay, go ahead.
This is Russ, who says, they are who we thought they were. My guess is they will lose the next two, beat Cincinnati back into the playoffs, and be one and done as usual. What are your thoughts? I don't think they lose to Cincinnati. And like with Denver winning, that makes it all the harder on Cincinnati. Actually still alive even after yesterday? I didn't check.
What if they lose the next two and Cincinnati's alive going into the last game, which I don't think they will be, by the way.
Yeah, let me double check on that. Regardless, I think they win that last game.
Yeah, probably. I know by that point we'll all have lost interest. By the way, Tim, when I'm in
New York, since he still is alive. Yeah, they're the last team still alive in the standings. They got Indy, Miami, and Cincy are the three teams out that are still alive, with Cincy being 10th.
By the way, Tim, I get nostalgic. When I go to New York and I'm in Times Square, did you see the HBO series The Deuce that starred James Franco?
I didn't know.
Okay, it was about the rise of the adult industry in America, and particularly in Times Square.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel sorry that I was a kid in those days and basically missed it. I've actually visited the site of the Show World Theater, which was ground zero when it all started. And why couldn't I have got to see that? I feel jealous.
Is there like a little plaque, like a little memorial like there is?
No, there isn't.
Richard says,
Tim, well, Show World, I've read up on Show World.
Yeah.
It had 4 floors. 4 floors. And when I tell you it had something for everybody, I could not be more literal.
Well, the Steelers are better this year simply due to better QB play. They are not on the level of the elite teams like the Chiefs, Bills, Lions, and Eagles. The deep playoff run and Super Bowl talk are from those wearing black and gold goggles. Yeah, because I think, again, to underscore the point, this is what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to go through the same the same challenges that you're going through right now. And we saw what Philadelphia did to them with ease.
I think the Steelers could play all 4 of those teams and go 0-4. And that's even with the only place I think they have a chance. You know what? I hate to declare the Chiefs vulnerable at whatever and 1. I think they'd lose all 4 games.
Calvin says thoughts on Tomlin benching Najee for the fumble, but not benching Washington for costing them field position with an unnecessary penalty. Bad coaching calls all game. Well, I mean, they benched Najee for a series, and then they never got the ball back. So, I mean, is that a benching, or they just sit him for a series after the fumble?
I was shocked that they turned to Cordarrelle Patterson. Trey Essex, who I love, the former Steeler lineman who has 2 rings, he called using Patterson instead of Warren their coaching malpractice. It was weird that Oppenheimer, maybe Tom, I don't know who, said, okay, we're down by 14 at Philadelphia. Let's let Cordarrelle Patterson get us back in it.
Yeah, if you don't trust Warren, I mean, there's a lot of, they'll just fill that hole next year. You know, like, trade Pickens and draft and sign one wide receiver. Okay, you're going to do that twice and be successful? All right. So obviously you don't trust Warren to be the number one if Najee's not there. So you got to fill that hole. Siamalu, if you're going to let him go, you better be able to fill it with Fautanu and another guard. You're letting Daniels go already for McCormick. Ogunjobi is another guy. Like, there's a lot of holes that are going to have to be filled next year.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if they don't win a playoff game, I wouldn't bring Wilson back at the price he's going to want.
Tomlin said, Bill said, Tomlin screwed up again by not going for it on fourth down in the fourth. The Eagles beat the Steelers in every facet of the game yesterday, including and especially coaching. Yeah, I don't know.
Not especially. They killed the Steelers on both sides of the line. That was a physical mismatch. The Steelers got bullied and pushed around, except for a brief time in the second quarter.
They converted what ended up being 10 first downs out of third down snaps. So I don't know what Tomlin was thinking when he gave the ball away. I know he's expecting better field position and he got it, but who was to say the defense was ever going to get him off the field? I don't know why he assumed that would be the case. I would have just gone for it and then let them score more quickly and get the ball back anyway, you know?
Tim, I'm really nostalgic for Times Square right now. Excuse my mind wandering. Even Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh had quite the district, too, back on Liberty Avenue back when.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. No, yeah, I'm too young to remember that. But, I mean, I did live on Liberty. I lived right next to the jewelry store. I lived in the Clark building, which was where all the jewelry stores were. Yeah, I lived there for about 2 years.
Wow.
And
that
then
a cool place to live.
So basically the district you're talking about, if I'm remembering right, was then moving towards the Strip district, right? Like the blocks in between there and the bus station?
From the Clark building to the bus station on both sides of the street, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, yeah. And
Yeah,
now that's been all gentrified. That's where the August Wilson Museum is now. That's where they've got restaurants and stuff like that now.
And there was one, Tim, on the north side too. I think where PNC Park is now, the Ritz Mini Theater.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the one I'm thinking of is a Garden. The Garden's always been there.
The Garden is over more toward Manchester.
Well, the Garden's right near me. Yeah, it's down Federal Hill right here. Yeah.
Ritz Mini Theater was where PNC is now, I think, like right in that area. And I remember when Deep Throat came out, it was at the Ritz and the lines were around the block, Tim. I said to my mom, what's that? She said, never mind.
Did you see what Chris put underneath you?
No. Memory, yeah. Hey, Tim, I mean, let's kick the ballistics here. You know what the highest grossing film of all time is?
Behind the Green Door?
Nope, Deep Throat.
Oh, there you go.
Yep, by far. Tim, they didn't count the money, they weighed it. That's the that's the title of a chapter in a book called The Other Hollywood, which is a great history of all this.
Mm-hmm.
That brought in so much money, they weighed it. It was like going to need a bigger boat.
Two more. Alex says it is only one game. The Steelers were in it largely to the fourth quarter, although it seemed like they were never in control and outcoached the entire game. Like, that's the part of the analysis that's missing here is Philadelphia held the ball for 10 minutes because they could. Like, that last drive lasted 22 plays because they didn't need to end it in 5. If they needed to end it in 5, they just would have given it to Smith and Brown on deeper post patterns.
Tim, they could have held the ball till now if they wanted. And they could have scored if they wanted to. Like I said, the Steelers were never in danger of winning the game.
Last one. Pete says, will it end up that the Cincy game will determine the North? Well, it could. But, I mean, by that point, it would also be dependent on whoever the Ravens play. I guess that's the Browns. So, by that point, I'd rather see the Browns again than I would the Bengals for a second time.
Tim, if we can one day do just a retrospective on like the Ritz Mini Theater and Liberty Avenue, I can keep it relatively clean for family. I just like the history of stuff like that because there's no, Tim, in that industry now, there's no stars. It's too disposable, too accessible.
You could kind of be like a Rick Seaback for the medium.
Okay, forget it.
All right, we're back next Monday where we might talk about the Ravens game or we'll talk about the Ritz and the Garden Theater for 30 minutes.
Line around the block, Tim.
This is Madden Benz Unfiltered.